Hey Greg and the Higher Side audience, my name is Scott Perkins from Madison, Wisconsin. I'm this round's Money Bomb winner. Thank you all so much. I'm one of the fortunate people to have discovered the show in its infancy and have been dedicated to following it ever since. I'm a second shift professional delivery driver, and I'm one of those weird people who absolutely loves my job. I'm an aspiring professional photographer and blogger as well. With this money, I'll be able to pursue my art and invest in some photography equipment. I can't forget my man Greg though, and for all the show has done for me personally, I want to gift back half of the winnings to him through that fancy little donation button he has on that really well-designed website you all should check out. I really loved your interview with Alfred Lambermont Weber, who mentioned a time traveler named Andrew D. Bashago. You gotta get him on, Greg. Anyway, keep it up. Peace and love from the Mad Town.
In the 1930s, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt addressed the nation through a series of radio broadcasts known as the Fireside Chats. His aim was to reassure the common man that our society would recover from its troubled times. But we're far from 1930, and I deal with a different kind of fire. For a new era of worldly frustration, we offer a fresh conversation. I'm Greg Carlwood, and these are the Higher Side Chats.
Boom, right out of the gate. Congrats and thank you to this month's Money Bomb winner. You guys know I like to give half the donations back to a random guy, and this month, Scott was that guy. I gave him $305, and he gave $152.50 right back to me. What a prince. You're a prince, Scott. Thanks for listening. All right. How we doing, Higher Side Chatters? Me, I've never been better. Drinking a little drink, smoking a little smoke from sunny San Diego, getting ready to enjoy my first holiday season outside of the retail world. And it was just about 2 years ago, after a hellish 10-hour Black Friday shift, that I peeled myself off the couch and went downtown and got into the green room of the Madhouse Comedy Club with Joey Diaz and whipped out one of those early, semi-embarrassing shows that I am oh so thankful for. A real pivotal moment, and I remember wanting that type of free lifestyle so bad, and I hated retail so much that I promised myself I would never go through that again. But I didn't work hard enough that year, and November came around again, and I said, okay, well, this time I'm serious. And here we are. But folks, I want this for everyone. And today is one of those shows that has a lot of content that I think can be very applicable and helpful to many situations going on right now. Whether it's the stress of the holidays or the pressure of work or the frustration of feeling stuck in a life that you didn't really want to get stuck in, anger at the lack of guidance and direction that you could have used in your youth. Even the protesters on behalf of the Ferguson situation could use some of these lessons. Or better yet, all the judgmental comments I've seen about this that really make me embarrassed and disappointed, watching people who have never had to struggle or even thought to sympathize with people who struggle start judging and spouting off about the way people are protesting when they've never thought to be that critical of the actual oppressors or the systematic corruption that makes these people feel like nobody cares. Because if they had, we would have fixed these problems a long time ago. But that's enough of that until after the show. I hate to fill up a guest's time on THC with a bunch of front-end commentary, but after the show, look out. So, some of you might be pretty familiar with today's guest, Daniele Bolelli. He is in the rotation as a guest on both Joe Rogan and Duncan Trussell's popular shows and has his own popular podcast called The Drunken Taoist, all three being shows that I tune into fairly often, so it was a real treat for me to have one of the big kids down to the humble THC table. And even though some of the concepts might seem a little oversimplified maybe at times, or they should be obvious, when I really examine the Rolodex of issues in my own life and the people I know's lives, or even the larger events on the national stage, I think it's super important to be reminded of some of these ideas of Daoism. Because if they were really that obvious and fundamental, I wouldn't see so many people not staying in the moment, not being mindful of the world around them, not striving for excellence or balance. There's a lot of imbalance out there. You know it, I know it, Daniele Bolelli knows it. So I'm going to play this short little ad for THC Plus and Conspiracies, and we're going to get down with the Tao and the man himself, Daniele Bolelli, on the other side. My, good people of the internet, it looks like Christmas is finally here, and I got some of my guests here to help me help you spread a little holiday love.
Good luck.
Oh, well, I know here at the Higher Side Chats, we couldn't be more giddy about it. And why not celebrate the corporate-driven season of spending with a gift that, oh so ironically, spits right in the face of the Christmas machine with the sweet, sweet softness of a t-shirt for the rebellious fashionista in your life from my little clothing brand over at conspiracies.net.
This is one of the most degrading things that anyone could possibly do.
Thanks, Freeman. Or better yet, give them the gift that gives all year long with a subscription to THC Plus for one of your oh-so-precious friends and family. I know that's what Jim Mars is doing, right, man?
Well, I'm kind of on the fence myself.
Guys, this is not constructive. Duncan Trussell, help me out here.
If I were Satan, the first idea I'd want to implant into their heads is...
Okay, that's not what I had in mind either, but if you know someone who enjoys THC, just go to the HigherSideChatsPlus.com with any credit or debit card and put in the email address and information for that special someone in your life rather than yourself. I know I and all the great guests on THC would really appreciate it.
We don't want to kill anybody or hurt anybody. We want to make a system that works.
Jacques, I think that approach is actually illegal. Let's not do that.
It was a great idea, but it doesn't go far enough.
No, man, it went too far. But guys, all I'm saying is a year or 6 months of THC Plus makes a great gift. Believe me, I just signed Douglas Dietrich up for a year, and he couldn't be happier.
Okay, I love you dearly. Yes, honestly, you flatter me too much. If you were a member of the opposite sex, I would propose.
See, what'd I tell you? Merry Christmas, people. All right, people, as you know, on this show we spend a lot of time analyzing the crimes of the planet's puppet masters, exposing corruption and dismantling propaganda, and while that definitely has its place, to only focus on the conspiracies of our external world, like anything, can be a serious distraction from looking internally, strengthening our character, and equipping ourselves with the tools to better deal with life's harsher times and the things we can't change. So today we're going to do a little bit to fix that with a philosopher and teacher that has been insightful to me when I need a good kick in the brain. His name is Daniele Bolelli, the man behind the wildly popular Drunken Taoist podcast, an accomplished martial artist, author of On the Warrior's Path and Create Your Own Religion, a how-to book without instructions, and he's taught a wide variety of classes at various universities in Southern California, a jack of many trades, a dominant Taoist. Daniele Bolelli, welcome to THC.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Yeah, man, it's great to have you here. I always enjoy your show and your Taoist lecture series, and really what I hope that we could do is explore that philosophy and your take on it and how we can apply it to life today, maybe give the people a little positivity in this painful world. What do you think?
Let's play. Let's go there.
All right, let's do it. I know you're really familiar with a lot of different philosophies and religions and cultures, so what is it about Taoism that puts it above all the others?
Because each philosophy or religion has its own particular set of doctrines, its own thing that you kind of need to study, need to understand. You need to study the Quran to be a Muslim. You need to read the Bible to be a Christian. You need to study a certain philosophical school to really be part of it. Taoism speaks the language of nature. You never have to ever read the Tao Te Ching to actually be practicing Taoist ideas. Taoism is sort of looking at how the universe is and basically just telling you the blueprint for how it works. Mm-hmm. Belief doesn't enter the picture. You don't need to believe in Taoist ideas. It's kind of like believing in the force of gravity. It's like it's there, and whether you believe it or not doesn't really matter. It's just that if you know how it works, then you can use it to your advantage. And if you don't know how it works, a lot of heavy things will fall on your head on a regular basis. It really is that simple. So that's what I like, that it requires no belief. It requires, in some way, many Taoist concepts are things that you can, just by having been alive and having paid attention, when you read the Taoist ideas, you're like, oh, of course. That makes perfect sense. That's kind of part of my own experience. It's what I already know through experience. And in other cases, maybe you don't exactly already know, but it gives you tips that resonate with your experience. I'm like, oh, that's why it works the way it does. Yeah. So I don't feel it that it's something that's trying to convince me. It's not something that I need to believe in. It's something that's pretty much addressing the world as is.
Exactly, man. And the more I look into Taoism and the insights of its philosophers and teachers, I have many more of those aha moments than I ever did with Catholicism, which I really had no say in. It was just sort of stamped on me at an early age before I could even make a decision. Mm-hmm. But tell us about the origins of the Tao Te Ching and the legend of Lao Tzu, because it's pretty interesting. It's largely allegorical, but what do we know?
Yeah, because I mean, the history of Daoism is completely lost to some degree. The early history, nobody knows. It goes so far back in time that, the main Taoist text, the Tao Te Ching, was attributed to this guy, Lao Tzu. But nobody even knows if Lao Tzu was actually a real person, whether he's sort of this mythic founder, whether maybe it was multiple people who wrote under the pen name of Lao Tzu. So it's all sort of myths and legends. And some of these myths and legends are actually pretty funny. Like there's this one story about Lao Tzu that says that after a lifetime working he was kind of like the head of the imperial library in this one kingdom in China. And he had acquired, a bunch of disciples, people who basically spent time with him because they thought he was this brilliant guy, really wise, but he had never written anything down. So by the time he wants to retire and get out of town, he's about to leave town, and one of the guards at the frontier says, well, I heard so much about you. Everybody say you're this brilliant, wise man, but you've never written any books. I want to, it would be a shame for your insights to be lost. So please, before you leave, can you write something down? And Lao Tzu just say, no, I just want to go. And the guard is like, well, that's really unfortunate that you feel that way, because I have the power to do what I want here. And this means that I'm going to throw you in jail and keep you there until you don't write me this damn book. Lao Tzu then grabs pen and paper or whatever ancient Chinese used to write stuff. And just for the next 3 days, write furiously this series of 81 poems, hands it to the guard. The guard is satisfied, lets him go. And Lao Tzu wanders off into the mountains and is never heard from again. So, 99.9% this is a legend, and it's not an actual historical event, but it's a fun legend. It's an interesting one.
Right. Yeah, it's a really bizarre story, and given the fact that it is most likely legend, do you think there is some hidden meaning that you can extract from that?
Yeah, the fact that even the very first line of the Tao Te Ching, the Tao that can be explained is not the eternal Tao. Meaning, if you can talk about it, if you can write it, if you can put it into words, it's not exactly it. What they mean by that is that, this Lao Tzu hesitance about committing anything to paper. What it's referring to is the fact that even the best ideas, most often human beings manage to turn them into dogmas. So what he's talking about is that the Tao it's an experience, it's alive, it's out there in nature, it's out there within ourselves. When you turn it into a purely intellectual ideas and commit it to paper, it's very, very easy for people to start misunderstanding it. And maybe in the name of devotion and thinking is a great idea, but they start making it too rigid. And the nature of the Tao is that it's flexible. It has to be adapted moment by moment. The printed word does not have the capacity to adapt to its audience, to adapt to the present moment. So that's one of the things that the Taoists are warning with, even with that story about essentially Lao Tzu writing the book under duress, is about this. The written word is a dangerous game because it's very easy to misunderstand. Now, once we have done that, then we can write stuff down. Once we are clear that that's problematic, then by all means, let's use it. Mm-hmm. That's why, the first line that almost denies the fact that you can talk or write about it could also be the last line, right? Because then you say, okay, it can't be done, it's over. And instead, he goes on to write a whole book about it, which seems contradictory, but it's just like a warning label. It's telling you, watch out, tread carefully. As long as you understand it, then we can play.
Well said, man. And I love that attitude. I wish today there was a lot more flexibility in people's beliefs and what they think they know, because there's always going to be exceptions to any rules in an infinite universe. And the Taoist parables and thought exercises do a great job of showing that, almost seeming paradoxical in nature a lot of the time. And they figured out in a big way by pointing that out that you can sort of talk around the Tao or the way or the nature of life or ultimate truth. But language never really just locks it down 100%. It can't.
That's why it's a very delicate game talking about Daoism, because it's so easy to over-rationalize it and thereby lose some of its meaning. That's why, it takes guys like Alan Watts who are great in the way, like Alan Watts, he didn't really create anything completely original from a philosophical standpoint, but he was able to translate Taoist ideas to a Western audience in beautiful fashion without losing the subtlety and the poetry. So Alan Watts, in that sense, was an absolute genius. He was able to do something that most people really could not do very well.
Yeah, Alan Watts was definitely my gateway into this stuff, and he often talks about Zen Buddhism. Is there much of a distinction between Taoism and Zen Buddhism? Is there a difference?
Mild, in the sense that Zen was born from the encounter of Taoism and Buddhism. So Zen is really a Taoism wearing Buddhist clothes kind of thing. It's in many, many ways, they're very similar. It's just that one will include some aspect of Buddhist ideas and one doesn't, but they are very much related.
Right on. Good to know. Well, I love it. And I love the humility of its approach to the big questions rather than the Western way of being so pompous as to say you have all the answers. But does it seem at all to you that a philosophy like Taoism is even kind of harder to grasp in modern times? Because even on top of our Western culture just having a completely different type of mindset, we also do a lot less real living than we used to, a lot less pondering of those big questions. It's kind of like presenting people a roadmap when they never even really considered the journey they were on.
On one level, yes. On the other level, the nature of the increasing complexity of life, the fact that we have access to more information than ever, is making it kind of obvious to more people that some of the traditional dogmas that humanity has relied on for a really long time are hopelessly limited in the face of this higher complexity. This is why ideas such as the nation state, which has been dominant for a really long time, are beginning to make less and less sense in a globalized world.
Absolutely.
This is why, even if you look at TV shows from the 1950s and today, in the 1950s, we like simple stories, good guys, bad guys.
Right.
Today, there's such a more refined degree of complexity that indicate a greater appreciation for subtle thoughts, for the fact that things are not always that black and white. This is something that Daoism would appreciate very, very much.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. In shows like Blacklist, where he's the number one wanted guy in the world, but he's also the main protagonist. It's very interesting that we are focusing more on that gray area.
Absolutely. Showing, and why is that gray area important? It's important because he's playing precisely with the idea that things cannot be oversimplified too much. That yes, there may be a moral dimension to things, but it's considerably more subtle than simply say, don't do this, don't do that. And that's where Daoism goes to play.
Yeah, that's what makes it so great. So let's say you got someone out there, they're struggling to find their place in the world, stuck in a passionless 9-to-5 job, trying to stay out of debt, and they're staring down the barrel of a stressful holiday season. Why should they care? Yes, it's an interesting philosophy, but how can this enrich a person's life in a practical way?
My attitude is that I don't really care about anything unless it enriches the quality of life. So to me, religion, philosophy, sports, anything in life, movies, books, if it's just in and of itself, if it's just a little entertainment, I mean, that's nice and all, but at the end of the day, as you say, there are more important things that happen on a day-to-day basis in everybody's life. I'm only interested in how do these things can be translated into making a difference. And for me, Taoist ideas are really just giving me tips on how to navigate through life, how to... Like, to give you an example, a sort of a more specific physical example, but because the body is so clear that we understand it in an easier fashion than just purely intellectual stuff. The creator of judo, Jigoro Kano, based his entire martial art on Daoism. And the whole idea was that by playing judo, you see how Taoist concepts apply in reality, whether, is the other guy able to throw you or not. A lot of the time depends on fine application of Taoist ideas right there in the moment, catching the precise timing. And when you see it work over and over again on a physical level, then it becomes interesting to see how you can apply it on a practical level. So I give you an example. Let's say you have kids. Anybody who try to teach their kids, to educate their kids with the same exact model, regardless of which kid they are talking to, is bound to fail because people are not all the same. Mm-hmm. So if you try to, let's say, be the one who's putting sort of tough rules and do this, don't do that, well, some kids are going to respond great to that. They need the discipline, they need the structure. And if you give them too much freedom, they kind of get lost. The next kid, if you try to do the very same thing with the next kid, you're just going to piss them off because they don't respond to that. They do respond very well if you talk to them, if you reason with them, if you show them why you have them do certain things or why you're suggesting something else. It's not that the more flexible reasoning approach is good or the rules are good or bad for that matter. It's that each one of those methods is perfect for that one person and is not perfect for the next person. So that ability, which is essentially what Daoism is telling you, that ability to read the situation, to have the awareness to apply the proper tool for the proper job, is what it's all about. Mm-hmm. If you're applying the idea may not be wrong, but the context will be wrong, and at that point the result will be wrong. A hammer is a great tool to drive nails into a wall. It's not a great tool to eat pasta. It's kind of that same thing. It's not that the hammer is wrong or pasta is wrong. It's just that it's a bad match. And knowing what works in what situation is basically what Daoism is all about.
And yeah, another lesson that's kind of in this vein, I know you're big into the application of these ideas into martial arts and the warrior's path and the art of warfare. And one aspect I really like is seeing that strength in the flexibility. For example, the oak tree is considered far stronger than a willow tree, but in extreme weather, a willow will bend and sway with the winds, whereas the rigidness of the oak tree will cause it to snap in half. And I think that's an example of where there's one of those great lessons in there.
Absolutely. It's like you need to have both. You need to have strength and flexibility because that will allow you to decide when it's appropriate to apply what exact balance of those energies. The Taoism tend to emphasize the yin aspect, which is the softer, yielding aspect, just because everybody understands the yang, which is the more masculine, aggressive, assertive aspect. Mm-hmm. The yang strength is obvious. Anybody can understand it. The yin is a lot more subtle. So Taoism emphasizes that. But that does not mean that it's all about being soft and yielding, and it's about finding the precise mix that particular situation requires. Mm-hmm. Ideally, you want to use as little energy as possible, just not to waste it. So the more yin as possible, but that does not mean that you don't use strength or assertiveness. You just use enough to get the job done. In some cases, enough may be still a hell of a lot. And that's okay. If that's what is required at the moment, that's what you do. Like the example I was bringing earlier, judo is funny because when people look at judo, they do not see these soft, pling-pling music and people moving effortlessly and throwing people all over. There's a lot of muscle work. There's a lot of sweat. It does not look like this Taoist thing. But the reality is that it is. It's not saying don't use strength. It's just saying use as much strength as needed to get the job done, but not 1 ounce more, because otherwise you're going to wear out too soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one line I really like in this vein is bad warriors lose, good warriors win, and great warriors win without fighting.
Yep, exactly. It's like if you can get the job done, think of it in like a conversation, whether it's business-oriented, whether it's relationship-oriented. If you get into a discussion with somebody and you have a disagreement and you are able to sort of pummel them into submission, either through your superior reasoning or by yelling louder or something, yeah, okay, you won the argument. That's better than losing the argument. But you just planted the seeds for the other person hating your guts and resenting you. And so it's a half a victory at best. There's something there that's not necessarily going to go well down the road. Mm-hmm. If you can find a way to approach that same potential conflict and lead to a result where the other person feel happy with the result that you achieved that you wanted, that's a real win. There is no real fight at that moment. You worked out the situation in such a way that everybody kind of gets what they want. Now, it doesn't always work that way. I mean, sometimes you can't, and sometimes it is a more direct conflict kind of situation. But in many, many, many of the conflicts we get into in life, we do it because we don't know how to play it right. I was listening the other day to a debate between a couple of people I'm not going to mention because I like both of them, so I don't want to pick on them. But they were arguing about religion. And it was this long ass fight back and forth about you said that, you said this. The hilarious thing is that they were basically saying the same thing with a slightly different emphasis. So this one thing that could have been just the friendliest conversation where you just see, I see your point. I think there's also this other aspect to consider. And if you do it in a gentle enough way, the other person will go, oh, okay, you're acknowledging that I have a point. And yes, now I see that you also have a slightly different point. It kind of makes sense. So both people could walk out of the discussion gaining something, keeping their own position, but making it more nuanced and understanding a little deeper. And instead, they yell at each other for 3 hours saying, oh, you're right. I'm right. No, I'm right. That's not particularly productive.
Right. And it's kind of in line with, on a larger scale, this is a concept that kind of took me a while, but Taoism is a relatively more or less, or I guess morally neutral philosophy would be a better way of saying it, but it's also anti-war.
Yeah. And it's not anti-war because it's anti-war primarily because it sees it as a waste of energy, that in a lot of cases you can get the job done without so much conflict. Right. It's not saying in all cases, it's saying, there are cases where it may be appropriate, but even then you want to do only enough to get the job done. And there are a bunch of cases where it's really not the most appropriate tool and you're getting the job done with paying a really heavy price. So that's why Daoism tend to emphasize the most limited application of war. Now, the most limited is tricky too, because part of the war business is that, generally speaking, defeated people are not incredibly happy with the people who beat them.
Right.
So one of the problems of warfare is that it kind of never ends. That unless you go for sort of a Genghis Khan Mongol solution where you just wipe out entire population where there's nobody left to fight you, unless you go for full-scale genocide and eliminate your enemies where there's no one left, then you're going to have people who hate your guts and who are going to be looking for a chance to hit you back when you're weak. That's not really a way to solve things long-term.
Right. That's why we have so many pockets on this planet of multi-generational, centuries-long warfare, because everybody goes back to a point in their head where they were wronged, and they're like, this was the start of it. No one actually looks at the whole picture and sees that it's been going on both sides forever.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like the Israelis-Palestinian things. It's like, when are they ever going to stop?
Right.
I mean, it's not that they are fighting where they are really fighting to wipe each other off the face of the earth. If one side won, wiping the other off the face of the earth, it would be clearly horrendous, but it would be done. This instead is this low-level, low-skilled fighting that goes on for decades and likely will continue going for decades. So unless somebody goes for the genocide solution, which obviously is not a solution, it's fucked up and horrible, then the only other one is figure out something where you can find some kind of a compromise that works for the greatest number of people involved. Now, in some cases, there are people who just don't work that way. It's like you don't compromise with Hitler. There are people who are not willing to play ball that way and use all the subtlety you want. You don't get it. So in that case, okay, Daoism would say there are places where it may be appropriate then to go down and fight. But it's sort of a last resort.
It's an approach to war and a philosophy that I really wish we could apply to world governments today, where we saw, we elect you as a representative and you communicate and deal with other regions around the world for us. But if you get us into physical altercations or a war, you should lose your job, because nobody wants war. None of the citizens want that. But instead, our mindset is that if we've been in a war for a president's entire 4-year term, well, we don't want to look at that as a failure. We instead want to reelect that person, because you can't change horses midstream, I've
been a fan. I always say it as a joke, but I actually don't really mean it as a joke. My solution to it all would be what I refer to as gladiators for world peace, which is, give us back the Colosseum. Anybody who wants to go to war with each other, hand them axes and swords, put them in the middle of the arena, have them hack each other to pieces while everybody else can have a beer and check it out on pay-per-view. And that way, no civilians are involved. Because the problem with most wars is that the majority of people dying are not the people fighting each other. They are civilians who really want to just be left alone.
Mm-hmm.
It would be, if you really want to fight, just get the people who want to fight each other,
right.
Away from everybody else.
Yeah.
That would be sort of, unfortunately, the gladiator for world peace idea hasn't quite caught on. I'm sure that the day it catches on, I will receive a call from Stockholm and to pick up the Nobel Peace Prize. This is the solution to all humanity's problems, but hasn't quite happened yet.
Right. Obama will have to turn it over to you.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I love these ideas, but it is tough to know when to fight back and how much to take in stride, when to be flexible. Like, how does a Taoist deal with an oppressive government?
No, and in fact, that's why I'm saying, again, that's what I mean by subtlety, right? Taoism is not telling you always take it in stride. Always, like, when you read the sort of the Christian thing about turn the other cheek, it's a very sweet sentiment. And I think in many cases it makes even sense. But there is the time when you don't,
Right.
There's the time when it's not appropriate for that particular situation. So Taoism has that there are certain guidelines, but it always leaves you the room for exceptions to those guidelines. It's like most days I'll turn the other cheek and let things go and find a way to make it work without conflict. And one day I'll just hammer you in the nose and just drop you on the floor. That may be the appropriate thing in that one situation.
Right.
Clearly, it's a judgment call, right? It's an individual judgment call. And what makes somebody's judgment better than another's, it really only the results it leads to. If you kind of find out afterwards whether that was the correct judgment call or not. There is no blueprint to tell you ahead of time. I mean, that would be a recipe, and life is too subtle to respond to rigid recipes. You can't apply to this particular situation happening in this second the rules that were good for the last one. Maybe they will work, maybe not. The best you can do is kind of make up your mind according to everything you know, and you find out by the results it leads to whether that was the right approach or not.
Well, this has me thinking about the situation in Ferguson, because last night they issued a state of emergency for Missouri, and I know a lot of people are angry. A lot of people write me emails about this situation. What do you think would be an effective response? Are you in favor of protesting, or is that futile?
Again, here really the question you need to ask yourself about any of these things is not whether it's right or wrong, is it working or not, or can you see it working if you keep going or not?
Right.
It's kind of like if you look at the civil rights movement, it was a gamble, right? You didn't know it until later whether it would work or not. The whole idea of economic protest, the boycotts, the Montgomery bus boycott, the sit-ins, it was a gamble. It was a matter of seeing, will you be able to persevere long enough that these businesses really start hurting and they are losing money and then they are going to have to give in to you? Or will they find a way around it where your boycott means nothing and you get tired before they do? The idea is sound, it makes sense, but then it's a matter of how you carry it out. So a lot of this stuff is, I would apply sort of in general, aside for just the specific Ferguson example, is do you see those tactics? In a way, it's like put yourself in your enemy's shoes. And how do you think they're going to react to this? If you were them, how would you react? So do you think that thing they are doing, will it help get the job done? Will it help achieve success or not? If you think it does, perfect, go for it. If you feel that you putting yourself in the other person's shoes, you would have a counter to that, or you would find a way not to respond to that, or it would just piss you off in a way that you will, if it's within your power to have a say over what's going to happen, you're not going to respond to that, well, then it's the wrong strategy. It's kind of like the same in a discussion with loved ones, when people get into an argument. Before you say something, think about how would you respond if the other person said it to you. it may feel right to say it, but is that going to lead to a resolution of the conflict that's beneficial for both? Or is just going to piss off the other person because you had to get it off your chest and feel that you're right and scream it in the other person's face?
Right. Yeah, I can't say that standing toe-to-toe with riot cops really does a whole lot, except it does show on the media that if people put themselves in the street and they get beaten down by police, it might raise awareness of how bad the situation is, or how ridiculous we've gotten about the idea of people just assembling to talk about an issue. We're not allowed to really do that anymore. So, I mean, it serves a purpose there, but largely I think it's a bit futile, because you're just going to get beaten down and locked up, and then 2 weeks later we'll be on to the next story.
I mean, exactly. It depends on, do you get the reaction you want that way? Is the getting beat down and arrested, is it getting enough outrage out there that is going to make a difference because it's going to apply pressure on the powers that be? Or is it not? That's the question. I mean, the whole Martin Luther King, for example, Birmingham confrontation, where you do essentially set yourself to get beat up by racist cops and white supremacists. Mm-hmm. If you first, you need to have TV covering it, because if you don't have TV covering, you're just an idiot getting beat up for no reason, because nobody's going to care. TV coverage need to create an outrage, and that outrage need to have enough strength to apply pressure, in this case on government, to step in and do something about it. In the context of the Birmingham confrontation, they had the Cold War going for them. The Soviet Union and the United States were competing for who can look the best on the world scene. They were competing to convince as many countries as possible to join their side. So some horrendously racist thing going on in the middle of the US shown on TV was not good propaganda for the US government. It would make them look bad. And they couldn't afford it. And so they had to respond. So applying that pressure forced them. It was perfect. It was a great strategy. Mm-hmm. It depends, again, on the context. Is what you're doing, is it going to create that kind of outrage and pressure that there will be the response you desire? Then you're doing exactly the right thing, and standing toe-to-toe with the police and going to jail is the right thing to do. If it's not going to get the reaction, then it's just a waste.
Right, and the irony is that we don't know until we've taken the leap of faith to put ourselves out there and take a shot at it.
Yeah, and I'm all for taking a shot at it, because in many cases you don't know until after the fact, but at least you should have an idea whether you do see it going somewhere, whether there's a reason why you think it's going to go somewhere, or you're just saying, I'll do it because I think it's right to do it. Mm-hmm. You need to at least have a plan. And again, maybe there is a very good plan in this situation. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not saying it's a bad. That's why I'm not really committing either way on this, because I'm not entirely sure. I haven't studied it in depth enough to fully know where it's going to go. So I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm kind of on the fence because I don't know. Is it affecting people strongly enough that there will be a big response to this, that there will be a change happening as a result of this action? I'm not entirely sure. I would really have to kind of study it in much closer fashion to really get it.
Right, and I try to keep from making too many absolute statements myself, but I do think there's some good advice in there for anyone involved in the Ferguson issue or a similar conflict to really serve the higher purpose. As hard as it is to get past the blind outrage and frustration, you have to think about cause and effect, especially when the media is trying to paint you as the bad guy. Don't give them ammunition to distract from the larger issue of abuse of power and corruption in the American police force. It is important to be on point and to frame that conflict between the people and the system, not one sector of the population versus another. But let's bring this back down to the personal level. A big bullet point to Daoism is practicing mindfulness. I've heard it 1,000 times from Alan Watts and other philosophers, but it is a little bit vague for some people. What does practicing mindfulness mean exactly?
In a way, it's awareness of yourself. Just be brutally honest with yourself, your limitations, how you react to things. It's very important. So much of our behavior is just reactive to external stimuli, and somebody else say something, and we're just like the bull that if you wave a red flag in front, the bull is going to charge. Mm-hmm. There's no choice there. You're just reacting. So, being brutally honest with oneself, seeing one's pattern, how you respond to things, and also awareness of everything else around you, how other people are, what makes them tick, how do they act and react to things. Once you understand it, in a way, you can pretty much predict what's going to happen before you do anything, which is why then you have the tools to know whether that particular action is going to prove useful or not. If you know ahead that saying certain things is going to get a reaction out of somebody, then you know ahead whether you want to go there or not. Is that leading where you want to be? Like, I don't know, have you ever seen you ever read all the books by Robert Greene, the 48 Laws of Power and those kind of books?
I've heard interviews with him. I'm pretty familiar with the work, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what he's saying is essentially applied Taoism. A lot of his thing is about sort of that strategic game applied to life. A lot of it is just Taoist ideas in order to get the job done with the least possible effort. Mindfulness is the tool that allows you to do it, because it's really about awareness of yourself and awareness of everything else around you. And the best way to practice it, beside sort of stepping outside of yourself for a second and actually paying attention to what's going on and looking at reality for what it is, rather than for what you project it to be. The other thing is really boiled down to empathy, to be able to put yourself into somebody else's shoes and the way see the world through their eyes. Then you know how they're going to react to things. Empathy is a huge tool in that regard.
It's really interesting because, major religions, they do just externalize our power. They give you get the dogma, you get the Bible, it's got all the rules in it, you follow the rules, you call yourself a Christian, and people get used to that approach. And when you hear about Daoism, and it's just kind of like, find the answer, look for it, figure it out. People are like, well, that's not what I'm looking for. I want the answer, man.
Exactly. I mean, that's part why Daoism in some way will never be something for everybody, because it's great if you have awareness, if you have the discipline to stick with paying attention to things, if you have, you need to have a lot of talents to apply it properly. Most people are either too lazy or are never been taught properly, or, just lack some of the natural talent to apply it right. And so it's like, don't make me work so damn hard. Just give me some damn dogma. Give me something that tells me, do this, don't do that. I follow the recipe and I'll be happy. I always use the example of cooking, that if you've ever been around somebody who cooks really well, you know that they don't go by a recipe. When you ask them a recipe is the most frustrating thing in the world, because every time they will be like, well, you put a little bit of this. You're like, what the hell is a little bit? How much? How many spoons are we talking about? It's like, a little bit. And then you let it cook for a while until it's a little brown. And you're like, what does that mean? How many minutes are we? You are asking for a recipe. You want, in some way, some reassuring dogma that will prevent you from screwing up. They are going by their awareness. They are going by feel. And they know exactly what the right moment is. They can't tell it to you because who the hell knows? The fire may be slightly higher or slightly less. You may be in a more humid environment or less. The minutes may change a little. That particular batch of stuff you're cooking may be, you know what I mean? It's like there are a lot of variables and the recipes can cover them all. The recipes are better than nothing. I mean, if you don't know how to cook, sure, it's kind of helpful. They prevent you from screwing up and they get the job somewhat done. But to really get it at a high level, you need to sort of ditch the recipe once you have developed enough talent for it.
Yeah, that's a great example. I love that. And I think it's also part of the reason why so many people get stuck in jobs that they don't care about or they have no passion for, and they do it for decades sometimes. It's because of that same mechanism of having the instructions. You come in, you clock out, you look at the schedule, you know when you got to be there. You don't have to think about it, out of sight, out of mind. And for you to find your own path, for you to find a passion that you could make a living from, I mean, no one's going to be able to give you that answer. You have to come up with that on your own.
Absolutely. It's a lot of work. It's really difficult. And ultimately, the responsibility is all on your shoulders. You have a shitty job that you have to do because you have to. It's like you can always bitch about it and blame your boss and do this and that. And when it's entirely up to you to figure out how to make it work for yourself, it's kind of scary because there really is no one else to blame. It's just like, am I able to pull it off or not? There's that fear of failure is huge because now it's kind of like, there are great players in basketball who would never want the last shot. When the game is on the line, they would gladly pass it to somebody else because there's just too much pressure.
Right.
And some people have the guts to accept that pressure. And I mean, I'm not even judging because it's like sometimes it is freaking scary. I get it. I get why some people don't want that. It's a hell of a lot of stress. At the same time, sometimes not taking it, you end up paying an even bigger price. It may not be as dramatic as the failure of trying to go for it and fucking up, but it is dramatic in the sense that it slowly chips away at who you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have, now that I've been able to do this show and become independent for almost a year now, this is all I've really done. And there's a lot of people who in the podcasting world, like smaller shows, will have me on and they'll basically just ask me for the answer. And I'm just like, you just got to keep doing it, but you got to figure out exactly what you want to do. And I think if you know what you want to do and you're working on it and it's stressful, you are so much better off than the person right before that step who is just frustrated with no direction and doesn't know what they want to do. Is there any advice you would have for how to figure that out? Because if you don't know what you want to do and all you know is that you're unhappy in your situation, I mean, that's kind of a scary place.
No, and in fact, step number one is figuring out what makes you happy. If I had all the time in the world, and what would I do for myself? If I don't have to worry about money, and then you start looking at the patterns that emerge from your interest, and you see, okay, is there any career, is there any way to make a living doing any of these things that I seem to enjoy so much? And, then you look at, is anybody doing that? Does anybody make a career out of this stuff? And if so, how do they do it? What is that makes them successful? What is that make them work? Out of the 10,000 people who try to do the same thing, why those 500 are able to pull it off? What is that they do different from the other 9,500? In some cases, the answer is unsatisfying because it's just dumb luck. In other cases, there is a logic, and then all you got to do is sort of take the tips from their model and apply it.
Yeah, man, I think you're spot on. That is exactly what I've tried to do. How well I've executed, I guess, is up for the people to judge. But on the flip side, it's funny because I know several people who have been fired or let go in the past year, and I've listened to them talk about how much they hate the job. It's not fair. It's pointless. I get no enjoyment. I'm just about to quit, etc., etc. And then when they do lose the job, then it's, oh my God, what am I going to do? I needed that job. How am I going to pay my bills? And I just want to say, the universe gave you a gift, man. It gave you what you wanted and you weren't strong enough to do yourself. It made you pull the trigger and it kicked you off a ledge and it said fly. And instead of thinking, okay, how am I going to get it right this time? They start applying for the same types of jobs. Well, I know we all have to have money coming in, but try to think about how, now that your slate just got wiped clean, you can correct that aspect of your life this time around.
Absolutely. And one of the things is, to justify why people end up in that place, there's something true about it at a social level. We really don't encourage people to think in a different fashion. From day one, there's this idea of people start working really early. They keep working through, we don't start with a basic thing. Like in the United States, for example, we hardly get vacation, 2 weeks a year.
Right.
2 weeks a year is ridiculous because what happens is people usually get, there's this anticipation for vacation. It's like, I can do anything I want. And by the time you are on vacation, you're like, man, the last 50 weeks of my year has been busy every single minute. I don't even know what it means to be me without having anything to do.
Right.
And, in 2 weeks, you don't really give people time to switch gear and figure it out and really sit down and get back in touch with who they are and what they want to do aside for their job. And they are back at the grind. And they do it for the rest of their life. So unless you really figure out what you're about, what makes you happy, all you do is you go from your job to the TV, you relax a little, you pass out, you wake up the next day, start over, and you're really living somebody else's life. Like it's a crime that in school they don't have you focus on that as your number one thing. It's like, what the hell do you want to make your life better? What is that you want in life to be happy? What do you need? What can there's none of that discussion.
No.
And in some way it's almost good because there's, part of the problem is who's facilitating that discussion. If it's your third grade teacher who's facilitating that discussion and they are idiots, it's even worse because the whole process seems fake and weird. But at the same time, there's nothing from a social level that encourage people to think, to take responsibility for their lives. And not even take responsibility in a bad, ominous way, just even take responsibility as in just figuring out what they are about, figuring out what brings them happiness. It's such a simple concept, and yet it's something that hardly anybody encourage. Most parents don't really encourage it because they're about doing stuff that's useful, which may not really be what you want to do for happiness. Schools definitely don't encourage it. Jobs don't encourage it. The structure itself of our life, having so little free time, doesn't encourage that. So really, people never have the chance to figure out what they are about. How could their life be considerably happier than it currently is? And you just go through the motion, you're part of the machine, and then you're dead.
Right.
Part of it is individual. People need to take responsibility for their own lives. But if nobody in your own surroundings has ever shown you how, if you have never seen somebody do it for themselves, then it's really hard for somebody to just start from scratch and say, it's kind of easy to sit on the sidelines and look at them and say, what a loser. Why did you never go for it? Why did you take responsibility? It's like a lot of our behaviors is learned. And if you have nobody to learn it from, if you have nobody around you who's a model for that, it's tough. And it's really hard.
Absolutely, man. It is tough. It is hard. And getting those messages to people is key. And I think that's a major bridge between the typical THC about some corruption or conspiracy and this one about Daoism and finding what makes you happy. It's about presenting valuable and underrepresented perspectives or pieces of information. Some are better on a macro scale, some are better on the micro scale, but I think that's a big commonality. And it's also another aspect of what the internet gives us. In terms of finding a passion, we see thousands of examples of people succeeding in their various fortes, and the masses should really get inspired by that. And when I have a friend who's looking for a job, I just say, the best jobs are the ones that weren't there before you made them.
Absolutely.
I'll probably say that more than once to them, and it'll get really annoying, but I just know that they're not hearing it from very many other places, and I think it's important to hear something to that effect.
Yep. Absolutely. That's I like that a lot. And I think, some of the best stuff. Today, there are more possibilities than in the past, thanks to technology in that regard, to make up your own thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of like been my MO to begin with. Is like, even when I think about some of the stuff I've done in schools, the courses that I've taught, I've done stuff that really makes no sense because there were no courses like that. I didn't have any of the requirements, and somehow occasionally I was able to push it through.
Yeah.
It's also a fight, you're also dealing with the fact that it's not all within our power. It's also what kind of response do we get. And sometimes you get a lot of doors slammed in your face, and you need to have both the perseverance to keep going and the ability to adapt, to figure out, okay, what can make the next door open? What can I do for it? And it is a tough game, but it's the only game in town. It's not like the only other option is, you take some shitty job you don't want to do and you're stuck with it for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. I get why people doing it because it's really difficult to depart from that model. But at the same time, why not? What do you have to lose? Living an unhappy life is not exactly going to pay dividends down the road.
Exactly. If you're already unhappy, what's the worst that can happen? You're going to continue to be unhappy?
Exactly. It's like, okay, then it's like, oh, it all fell to pieces. It all sucks. Okay, shoot yourself. You're going to be dead soon anyway. Might as well.
That was one of the first things I ever heard from Alan Watts that really kind of shook me up. Is he, I'm butchering it, but he says something to the effect of, if you aren't enjoying your life, if the game's not worth the candle, you owe it to yourself to kill yourself. Get on with the next story, because this one ain't working for you.
Yeah. In fact, I have nothing. I mean, I'm all for trying to find ways to make things work, but I definitely would never judge anybody. It's like, I don't know what it means to be inside their skin. Last thing I'm going to do is judge somebody for choices that they have to deal with and what they have to do. I do find the whole suicide thing clearly not a desirable outcome, clearly
Right.
something that I would wish on anybody, but at the same time, I don't really judge it either. It's like, hey, you haven't tried to be them. Try being them, then tell me about it.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, when bad things do happen, when you do get into this rut of depression, or you lose someone you care about, or the universe brings pain into your life, how does the Taoist deal with it? What can we learn from Taoism to kind of ease that pain?
Well, the thing that's I noticed tend to help me some of the time, and again, some of the time being the key, because there is no recipe that's going to work every single moment. That's the thing I don't like about all the positive thinking sort of opera approach to this kind of stuff, is all like, take the 7 steps to inner power, and if you do this, that, and the other, it's always going to work. Well, there is no such thing. There are times where you're trying your best and you still get slammed in the face. Some of the stuff that I find useful is one is sense of humor always helps, in the sense that taking things less damn seriously helps. But the other is the exact opposite, is staring at the beast in the face, staring at the scene that scares you the most, and in some cases accept the fact that there's nothing you can do to change them. And that just is a horrendously harsh reality to deal with. I mean, just the very fact that everybody's going to die and we don't know what the hell happens, even if anything happens afterwards, that's a hell of a scary, heavy, existential thing to live with all the time as human beings. Looking at it, and in a way, whatever works for you in terms of accepting it, whether you need to watch 320 times in a row or whatever it may be, that gives you sort of this, okay, there's nothing I can do about those situations, but I'm going to find a way to have a good time for at least the next second, and then the second after that, and the second after that.
Right.
I dig the level of defiance in the face of hopeless scenario. Sometimes hopeless scenario are there regardless of what you do. You can play your cards as well as you want, and you still deal with realities that are horrendously harsh. That's not all on our shoulders. We don't have that kind of power. But what we do have power on is how we react. And in some cases, that defiant spirit is what prevents you from sinking into the deepest depression. Or if you do sink into the deepest depression, it helps bring you out at least some of the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The name of the game is about being very delicate in your approaches. Mm-hmm. And then be able to not be delicate when it calls for,
Right.
I mean, I hate to sound like a broken record, but really that's how life is. It's it's a matter of constant tiny adjustments. There's this one guy, the creator of Aikido, Morihei Ueshiba, people were complimenting him for his amazing balance in martial arts. They were saying, you never lose your balance. And he said, no, I actually am losing it all the time, but I recover it so quickly that you never see me lose it. A human body is constantly in a state of unbalance. When you walk, you're always about to tip over. And if you keep going in that direction without moving the other foot, you will tip over. Mm-hmm. It's about, I'm going a little to the right, now I'm back a little to the left. My body's swinging this way, now I balance it the other way. That's what you need to do constantly in life.
Right. It is a matter of perspective. If you look at the Middle East from space, it looks so beautiful and peaceful. Or you look at a person sitting at their desk and they seem so boring, but zoom in with a microscope on the billions of cells and bacteria fighting off infections and colds, and it looks like amoeba Armageddon.
Yeah, there's a Game of Thrones is happening inside of us constantly.
Well said. So Wow, man, this has been great. It's about that time. I really enjoyed the show. I'm very lucky to have spent this time with you, man. I know we talk so much about waking up in the conspiracy world, but I hope this was a bit of a personal wake-up call for some people, an opportunity to think about things differently if you've been coasting or really haven't taken the reins of your own life and all that good stuff. But before I really let you go, man, do you want to take a minute to tell the people about where they can keep up with you and give them a little more info about your books?
Sure. So I ran the Drunken Taoist podcast. Drunken is having too much to drink, and Taoist is in Taoist. You can find it on iTunes. You can find it on the web. DanieleBolelli.com. I don't know if you put episode notes, because again, the spelling of my name with all those damn L's get complicated and people get lost.
I'll put a link.
Perfect. So that would be great, because that's sort of the source for everything else. I mean, I have a Twitter that I use regularly. I have a public Facebook page that I use. So, any of those, any which way you guys want to contact me, that's great. And books are out. I mean, I have 3 books on Amazon. Working on a 4th one right now. So, but yeah, all of this stuff, my website is probably the way to then direct you to all of these other things if you're interested.
Cool. Very awesome. Daniele Bolelli, Italian stallion, gentleman and scholar. You're the man.
Thanks so much, man.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
All right, guys, there we have it. I hope you got a little something out of that. Definitely check out Daniele's Taoist lecture series if you liked what you heard. Of course, we have the Plus Show 2, where we talked more about the warrior's mindset and confronting laziness, dealing with fear and loss and weakness, meditation, psychedelics, struggle and character, and my favorite part, ideas for actually building a system that works. I think we can apply a lot of these concepts to the current tensions and inequalities around the country and the planet and be better off for it. I know this Ferguson thing has got me so riled up right now, and it really wasn't that way at first. My comments have kind of been all over the place on this thing, but if we're talking about balance and human decency, then I feel the need to drastically overcompensate to counteract some of the ignorance I've been hearing the last few days. And it's about way more than this particular interaction between Mike Brown and Officer Darren Wilson, but even in this instance, whether he mouthed off to the cop or not, he shouldn't be dead. He shouldn't be shot 6 times, twice in the head. People say, well, Mike Brown was a big guy. Well, Darren Wilson is 6'4" and has been trained to disarm and detain people. He has non-lethal tools at his disposal when dealing with an unarmed 18-year-old. And if he couldn't do that, regardless of how aggressive or thuggish the kid might have been, he shouldn't be a cop. Bottom line. And it's this utter lack of consequences for cops who shoot first and ask questions later that has people so outraged. And to make it worse, this cop, who was put on paid vacation, had people donate over $500,000 to him. Why? For what? How about forking it over to the family of the kid you killed? Whether or not you think it was necessary, how about a little humility and compassion? And that goes for all these people saying that he was a thug or an animal. Really, how much do you know about this guy? You see 10 seconds of a clip from a convenience store, and here he was shot by a cop, and it's like, yep, just another one of these ghetto thugs. Jesus Christ on the cross, bite your tongue. How about this 12-year-old kid who was shot the other day? Was he a thug? Or hundreds of people who have been victims of abuse of power by the real thugs? Just follow one of these Facebook groups that track the crimes of the police. There's a new one every day. It is a real problem. We need to stop ignoring it. What about the girls in San Diego and all over the country who've been raped and sexually assaulted by aggressive police without any justice? Do they deserve it? Should they just have been a little bit uglier and none of this would have happened? Maybe dress a little less provocatively? Are you just not going to worry about it until it's your wife or your daughter? I mean, are you honestly just that selfish? When you are stuck in a poor neighborhood or have a helpless and unjust situation, I hope you remember how you've responded to this situation. Because if you've ever had to feel like there's nothing you can do and your voice couldn't possibly be heard, you might feel like torching up a gas station or blocking a highway too. Because where is your fellow man? Where is the community? They sure aren't feeling it. And that's the thing. How loud and aggressive and crazy do people need to get to extract a little compassion and brotherhood from the rest of us? It didn't happen at Occupy. And to hear people saying, well, I don't support blocking a highway. I don't support the looting. But not a word about the abuse of power by police. Not one word from these people. I hear, well, if anything, now the protesters have lost my support. Oh, really? And a lot of good your support was doing them yesterday. What does your support mean? The slant of your tweets? Have you ever fought for anything? Once ever? It is okay if you haven't, honestly. Not every fight is going to be your fight, but for God's sake, shut up when someone is out there making sure the corruption stops before it hits your front door. There's people who will sit there and let a million other people they don't know get killed by cops and just say, well, they probably had it coming because the people who protect and serve us couldn't possibly be abusing their power. And why don't we put the serve back in protect and serve? I'd like to see the police working at the soup kitchen twice a week. That's what public servants should do. There's plenty of people that need help. And if you say you want to help people, every cop says they want to help people. I don't get it. I see them driving right past people with flat tires, homeless, hungry people begging for help. Why don't you go be an example? Go be a hero to someone. Show us why we should respect you. Prove me wrong, because I'm pissed. I am sick of the judgment like this couldn't happen to you. I don't fight with the police and I'm still alive. Well, that's great. Until maybe one day you and your wife or your son or your daughter get in a huge fight and they peel out of the driveway and down the street and they get pulled over by a cop who shot 2 people in the past without any problems and he thinks he's God among the slaves. And this guy feels like your wife or daughter or son or brother just isn't giving him the respect he deserves, so he wants to exercise that power a little more. And you lose someone you love. And you look around the world feeling more alone than you ever have. And that cop goes on a nice paid vacation with no consequences and no one comes to your defense. And then a person who had it all might have a little sympathy for someone who never did. And it makes me so damn angry. Everyone is fine with protesting as long as it's not the kind where I have to see it or deal with it and it doesn't block my traffic. Well, what you're saying is I'm all for protesting as long as nobody bothers me. How do you think that makes the people who don't feel safe in their community feel about you getting to work on time? And then you have the gall to judge a protest and proclaim whether or not it has your support? What does your support mean? It doesn't mean anything. You're not active. But when you're an hour late, don't say, man, someone should do something about those protesters. Say, man, somebody better do something about police brutality because people are fed up. And I don't blame them. I am too. That is the least you could do. And the issue of responsibility is a tough one too, because are these not our communities funded with our money? Do we not have a responsibility to do something at some point? I think we do. It's the same issue of if we're guilty by association for the hundreds of people around the world killed by our country's drones and weapons. Is there ever a time where we need to do something about that? Where we consider people on the other side of the world worth standing up for? Just chill out with that judgment of how people should handle systematic unfairness. If you don't experience it, then be thankful and shut the hell up because there's a lot of crime, corruption, and conspiracy out there ruining the only lives we'll ever have for some people. Instead of worrying about if it's your problem or responsibility, how about you just rise up and do something great? We all have a real opportunity to be amazing, and we're just kind of watching it go by. I see pictures of people protesting all over the world, sometimes over things as arbitrary as student loans. But we can't be bothered. Just think about how that looks to someone in Africa or India or Pakistan or Cuba or Mexico or dozens of other places. And think for a second how you must look to them just by living your life. How insulting your day-to-day is to a good portion of the world's people in poverty. I'm right there too. I'm not saying you have to feel guilty about your life, but it would be nice if you took it upon yourself to at least be humble and respectful and by all means thankful for what you have. That's the reason for the season. Stop waving that American flag for just a minute, post one less douchey comment, stand up for one single injustice that you see that's outside of yourself. Just one single thing. Because you have it awesome. And the elite bank on that fact and the idea that the people who have resources for change will have just enough to not care. Think about that this Thanksgiving. Watch how your family talks about Ferguson, because you know they will. Everyone wants to gossip and hate and be cowards. Well, you don't have to go out on the street, but just stand up and say, you know what? There's an increasing number of problems with cops. I don't think they need to have tanks. I think maybe we should help people in the ghettos instead of just locking the car doors when we have to drive through and put these ignorant people in their place. You can't change them, but you can make them feel a little less comfortable spewing that garbage. Let them feel a little shame and embarrassment for those kind of comments, because that will happen, and that's how you could help. I don't know, guys. I'm not perfect, and we live in a tangled, complex web of problems. But this is definitely one. So enjoy the feast. What else can we do, right? I mean, that's what I'm going to do. But a little respect for other people's problems is never a bad thing. So, I love you guys. Thanks so much for listening. Your move.
There was a time when my world was filled with darkness, darkness, darkness. Then I stopped dreaming, now I'm supposed to fill it up with something, something, something. In your eyes I see the eyes of somebody I knew before, long, long, long ago. But I'm still trying to make my mind up. Am I free or am I tied up? And I change shapes just too hard in this place, but I'm still an animal. Nobody knows it but me when I slip. Yeah, I slip, I'm still an animal. There was a hole and I tried to fill it up with money, money, money. But it gets bigger till your horse is always running, running, running. In your eyes I see the eyes of somebody who could be strong. Tell me if I'm wrong. And now I'm pulling your disguise up. Are you free or are you tied up? And I change shapes just too hard in this place, but I'm still an animal. Nobody knows it but me when I slip. Yeah, I slip, I'm still an animal. And I change shapes just too hard in this place, but I'm still an animal. Nobody knows it but me when I slip. Yeah, I slip. And I change shapes just too hard in this place, but I'm still an animal. Nobody knows it but me when I slip. Yeah, I slip, I'm still an animal. And I change shapes just too hard in this place, but I'm still an animal. Nobody knows it but me when I slip. Yeah, I slip.